Hello! Today we're going to be talking about my favorite way to answer the problem of evil. Here's the short version. Hey, we could rebel against God in heaven because we have free will, but the evil on earth will somehow make sure that doesn't happen. Coolio. Now, we'll get into the motivations and reasoning behind this theodicy. We'll begin by asking what the ultimate goal of God, a perfect being, is concerning his creatures. Maybe it's to make creatures happy. That sounds like a nice goal and all, but he could complete that by just hooking us all up to tubes which pump us full of pleasure-inducing drugs without us ever needing to ever move or think or anything. That's horrible, actually. It seems like God's goal would extend beyond mere pleasure. Here's an idea. What if God wants creatures to be in a true love relationship with him? This seems like a far better goal, as it not only promises infinite pleasure, but infinite meaning as well. Coolio. However, one feature of being in a true love relationship is the ability to opt out of it. So God will try to save us, by which I mean make us willing and ready to enter this relationship, but we have the free will to refrain from being saved. As a Christian, of course, I take that to be people putting their faith in Jesus Christ. Now, more could be said in defense of this, but we'll be looking at this notion of getting saved later on, so just wait till then. Moving on, I'm going to assume the truth of Molinism for this theodicy, and I'm also going to assume that you know what Molinism is, so if you don't, you better look that up. But as a quick refresher, we can think of all possible worlds. In some possible worlds, no one is saved and all have freely rejected God. In others, all choose to be in a relationship with God, and we have everything in between. Then we have a subset of possible worlds, the feasible worlds. These are the worlds that God actually can create given the choices of free creatures. Now, we basically have a theodicy already because God should always prefer creating a world with the maximum number of people saved, even if it has a ton of evil in it. Like, imagine our world filled with pain and suffering. If God could manage to subtract all that evil from our world, with the only side effect being that one fewer person would be saved, God wouldn't want to do that. The finite but large amount of people suffering a finite but large amount would never stack up to the infinite good of one soul being saved. So maybe God got unlucky, and the feasible world with the most people saved is one with tons of evil in it. This theodicy would be nice, but it has some major flaws. First, imagine a fawn, or some easier to draw animal, being trapped in the forest and dying a slow, painful death with nobody around. This natural evil doesn't seem to contribute to anyone's salvation. But we have an even bigger and more complicated problem. Warning, this is going to get pretty abstract. First, let's say that event E has a probability P of producing outcome X. We could ask, of the feasible worlds including event E, how many will also include outcome X? The answer is P of them will. Like if P is 37%, then 37% of feasible worlds, including event E, will include outcome X. As an example, let's look at the event of Jim flipping a truly random coin where the chance of getting heads is 50%. There are presumably a plethora of feasible worlds where this event occurs. But in only 50% of these worlds will Jim get heads. Pretty straightforward, but this has huge consequences. We can use this principle to deduce that if there are infinity feasible worlds, which include E, and the probability P of outcome X is greater than 0, then there will automatically be P times infinity, which is infinity, feasible worlds that contain outcome X. So if we look at the event of Jim flipping a new coin, this one with a 1 in 100,000 chance of getting heads, and this event occurred in infinity different feasible worlds, then even though the worlds where Jim gets tails vastly outnumbers the worlds where Jim gets heads, there is still going to be an infinity of worlds where Jim gets heads. Now, here's the big question. What's the probability that a given individual will be saved? Well, we have two answers, 0 or something bigger than 0. Let's look at the first option. Is the probability that an individual would be saved equal to 0? Now, this might not be as crazy as it sounds at first, because something can be possible while nonetheless having a probability of 0. Like, if a truly random number generator had to pick a random number between 3 and 4 and every outcome was equally likely, then pi would be a possible answer because it's in between 3 and 4. But its probability is still 0. Some people like to posit infinitesimals, numbers which are larger than 0 but less than every positive real number. I don't like infinitesimals, I don't think they work, so I'm not using them, but the argument here in no way relies on my exclusion of them. Anyways, despite the fact that we could have possibilities with a probability of 0, it doesn't seem like getting saved is one such possibility. Like, how would that work? It's not like an individual hears an altar call and subconsciously picks a number between 3 and 4 and only converts if that number is pi. In fact, it seems human decisions never make choices with probabilities of 0 involved. Every one of the alternatives we consider has some non-zero probability associated with it. So for a given individual, the probability that they would be saved is above 0. Now, what about the probability that two individuals would both be saved? Is that 0 or above 0? If it's equal to 0, then the salvation of one individual would need to 100% of the time make the other individual's salvation impossible, or otherwise have a 0% probability somehow. And even if you think that happens sometimes, it obviously doesn't happen 100% of the time. So we can go from the premise that a single individual has a non-zero chance of being saved to a non-zero chance that two people are saved. But we could use the same maneuver to go from 2 people with a non-zero chance of all being saved to 3 people with a non-zero chance of all being saved. At each step, the probabilities are going to decrease, but they will always remain above 0. We can extend this step-by-step logic all the way to 1 trillion individuals. They have a small, but non-zero chance of all being saved. But this is bad news for Molinism if you think that there are some people which are not saved. If there are infinity feasible worlds which include 1 trillion people offered a chance at salvation, and there is a non-zero chance that all the individuals in a given feasible world containing 1 trillion people would be saved, then there is an infinity of feasible worlds where everyone in them is saved. So, why isn't our world like that? To put it simply, unless something has a probability of 0, then God can almost certainly get it, given Molinism. So, why aren't all saved? There are several simple ways one could go about answering this, but I'm not satisfied with them. And instead of telling you why I don't think these work, I'll just tell you what I think does work. I think that there is a clever way to maintain that the probability of a given individual being saved is equal to 0. But we need to be clear on what being saved really means. To qualify as saved, an individual doesn't just need to be on their way to entering a relationship with God, but they need to be entering a relationship that will last forever. This latter clause gives us something to work with. What if we posit that humans necessarily have the ability to rebel in heaven? They can always freely choose to leave their relationship with God. And that the probability this would happen in a given period of time, say each day, is non-zero. Well then, the probability of being saved and never rebelling is the probability of not rebelling on day 1 times the probability of not rebelling on day 2 times the probability of not rebelling on day 3, and so on. And if these are all 99.9999999% or something, then even though every individual day has a very low chance of resulting in a rebellion, making it through eternity without rebelling is 99.9999999% to the power of infinity, or the limit as n goes to infinity of that to the power of n. That's 0. There is a 0% chance that a human, left to their own devices, will stay in an eternal relationship with God. Coolio. Remember though, that doesn't make it impossible. God has the ability to intervene so that, if someone would have rebelled in such and such circumstances, they never do face those circumstances. A mental image I like is a ball rolling down an infinitely long ramp, but it indeterministically moves left and right. However, one has the ability to add some slats to the side of the ramp before the ball starts rolling. What's the probability that the ball will roll down this infinite ramp without ever falling given this configuration of slats? Well, 0. However, a Molinist God could ensure it keeps rolling forever and never falls. So, we have this problem that arises from Molinism. We could solve it by positing that we can rebel in heaven. And it also allows us to counter the problem of evil by pointing to a function that the suffering on earth may serve. There will be times when God needs to set up an individual's circumstances in just the right way to avoid their rebelling, and this could involve allowing an instance of evil to have occurred in the past. Like Jim here. He was going to rebel, but he learns about that poor animal dying slowly and painfully, so he doesn't rebel. You might ask, why did being aware of this instance of evil keep Jim from rebelling? Well, an intuitive answer is that Jim thought of something like, hey, this evil experience in a non-heaven world reminds me what being away from God was like, so I don't want to leave my relationship with God. That's a possibility. But here's the annoying part, I ultimately can't know how evil will affect those in heaven. Our modern understanding of psychology really only ranges over humans from 0 to just over 100. I won't be able to predict the psychological effects a particular instance of evil would have on someone like Jim, who could be quadrillions of years old. But I want to be clear, this theodicy is very different from skeptical theism, which is the view that we're not in a position to know the reasons God permits evil. For this theodicy, it just so happens that one cog in the argument is the contingent future decisions of free creatures. So I can't tell you exactly what that looks like, I can only give you a general description. This theodicy still specifies the greater good God is after, eternal relationship with him, and why even an omnipotent God could have difficulty getting this good without allowing some evil. Now that we've gone through all this, we should ask, how complex is this theodicy? The more stuff we need to posit to explain why God allows evil, the worse the theodicy is. Now, the motivations for and the interactions between the parts of the theodicy are really complicated. But let's not get confused. The actual parts aren't themselves all that complex. Besides Molinism, there are only 3 main parts to this theodicy. First, God would want an eternal relationship with creatures. Second, we always have a chance of rebelling from this relationship. Third, evil helps prevent that rebellion from occurring. The first part just seems to follow from perfect being theism. The second part is actually biblical, on top of being simpler and cohering well with what we already know. We already know that people can rebel against God. I'm not positing anything new, I'm just saying that this ability will remain unchanged in the future. Furthermore, the Bible literally begins with 2 people freely rebelling against God in a heaven-like place because they were tempted by a free being who himself rebelled against God in heaven. It's almost like God is trying to tell us that the reason we're not in a heavenly place right now is because we are prone to rebellion. Now, to substantiate the notion that evil actually prevents such rebellions, we again run into the fact that we can't psychologize people who are quadrillion or googolplex or whatever years old. However, it seems quite intuitive that this would be true. We don't think the grass is greener on the other side if we've been to the other side and see that the grass isn't green. However, if intuition isn't enough for you, here's a quick argument. As long as you could think of some scenario where evil can actually prevent rebellion, there is an eternity of chances for that scenario to actually happen. So the chances of evil being required for preventing rebellion are quite high. Now, some quick clarifications regarding this theodicy. I'm not saying God decided to cause evil to happen to prevent rebellions. I'm saying that the way God's intentions look, he is simply refraining from stopping various evils because he would also be stopping greater goods in the process. Another clarification is that when I say you can rebel from heaven, I mean it in a sense stronger than if someone said they can punch themselves in the face. They actually can't, since they don't have a reason to do that. Even though they're strong enough to do it, they're nonetheless unable. It's when you have multiple reasons to act, which pull you in different directions, that free will, so to speak, kicks in. That's the way we can rebel. We will actually have a reason to rebel. What's that reason? Well, the best candidate I have is that in heaven, we'll still have the ability to choose to be prideful. There are a couple of reasons for this. One is that pride is focusing on the good of oneself. To be in a true love relationship with God, we'll need the ability to focus on God's goodness, and we'll need to freely choose how to exercise this ability of focusing on goodness. So pride would just be misusing this power. Also, humans are made in the image of God. It seems that both God and humans have the ability to view oneself as the center of everything. Since God is the center of everything, that's fine for him, but humans have to choose to not exercise this power. Anyways, before ending, I'd like to go over a couple more objections to Christianity that this theodicy answers. First, it explains why God didn't just make humans in heaven straight away. Humans would have rebelled. But it can still be the case that some humans never need to experience the suffering on earth to never rebel. This explains why babies automatically go to heaven if they die. Lastly, it explains that the reason that no one will use their free will to sin in heaven is precisely because free will was used to sin on earth. That's the end of this video. Thanks for watching it. Please subscribe or support me on Patreon if you enjoy this content.